and welcome to yet another tutorial by Davies Media Design. My name is Michael Davies, and in today's tutorial I'll be showing you how to create wedding invitations using GIMP. This is GIMP version 2.10.8, which at the time of this tutorial is the latest version of GIMP. And everything I'll be using for this tutorial is free, so we've got a few graphics here that are found for free on Pixabay, and then we've got some text here, and all the fonts used in this text are also free. Before we dive into the tutorial today, I want to direct you guys over to my website at daviesmediadesign.com. As always, we have tons of GIMP video and text tutorials on here, so definitely check that out. You can also enroll in our GIMP photo editing course from beginner to pro photo retoucher on Udemy. And you can support our channel and help us grow by becoming a patron on Patreon and get some awesome GIMP extras in return. And I'll include a link to this as well as all the relevant links from this tutorial in the description of the video. Alright, so here is the first graphic we'll be using in today's tutorial, and this is just a watercolor sort of branch look. It looks like the laurels that are used traditionally in wedding invitations. That's why I chose this composition. And it's a PNG, which means it has no background. You can see the checkerboard behind here. That represents transparency. So to download this, just click the free download button here. And I went with the 341 by 1280 download. So just click download there. I also downloaded this gold foil sort of pattern here. And I went with the 1920 by 1280 on this one. And then I downloaded this Windsong font for free on Font Squirrel, and then this Quicksand font as well from Font Squirrel, and I'll include all of these links in the description of the video, of course. And by the way, if you're not sure how to add fonts into GIMP, I do have a how-to article on my website that I'll link in the description that shows you how to do that. But once we have all of our elements that we're going to need for our invitation, just go to File, New. And this will of course create a new document. I'm going to start by setting the units here to inches, and you'll see I have this set to 4.5 by 6.25 or 6.25 as the width and height. So this is going to be the height of our card. You're going to want to set this to whatever width and height your final card is going to be that you're printing this on. And then under advanced options, just make sure that the X and Y resolution are set to 300 pixels per inch. And I also recommend setting the precision to 32-bit floating point if your computer can handle it. And now I'll click OK, and that'll create our new composition. And real quick, I'm just going to come over to my bucket fill tool, and I'm going to change the color to white here. I just forgot to set the background color to white. The first thing we're going to do here is we're going to import that watercolor branch object into our composition. So I'm going to come over here to my file window, and right here we have that hand-painted object that we want to bring in from Pixabay. So once I've downloaded that, I'm going to locate this in my downloads folder and then just click and drag this and drop it into our composition. Now it's going to ask me if I want to convert this to the native sRGB color space, and I do want to do that, so I'll just hit convert. And now you'll see we have our object here. It's a little bit larger than what I want it to be, so I need to shrink this down, but I also need to rotate it and move it up a little bit. So I'm going to use the Unified Transform tool here. This tool allows me to perform multiple transformations all within one tool. So I'm going to come over here to our object and click on it. And now you've got all of these different shapes here going along the corners of the image and throughout the various midpoints in the image. I'm going to hover my mouse just over the top right square here, and that is going to bring up the rotate tool on my mouse pointer. So now I can rotate this. If I hold shift, it's going to rotate it in 15-degree increments, and that just allows me to quickly and easily rotate this 90 degrees. And now you can see this is nice and horizontal. So now I'm going to hover my mouse over the large square over here in the corner, and I'm just going to hold shift while I click and drag this, and that is going to maintain the aspect ratio of my object while I drag it down, or while I scale it down, that is. And once I have this to the size I want, I can just release everything. And you'll see if I hover my mouse in the middle of this object, it'll turn this into the move tool. And so now I can just move this over here. And real quick, before I hit transform and apply this transformation, come over here and make sure your interpolation option is set to low halo or no halo. That's just going to ensure that the quality is maintained as best as possible. So now I'll come over here and click transform. And now we have our object here, and it's in the general vicinity of where we want it now. But what I'm going to do is add a couple guides here, and that's just going to allow me to easily align this object and future objects that we bring into this composition. So I'm going to go to Image, Guides, New Guide by %. And I'm going to make sure the direction is set to horizontal and position is set to 50%. And I'll click OK. This will create a center guide here on our composition, and I'm going to create a vertical center guide because this is a horizontal center guide. So now I'll go to Image, Guides, New Guide by %, and change this to vertical and click OK. So now we have both a vertical and horizontal center guide. And I can grab my move tool, and now I can move this and make sure the center here of this object snaps to that center guide. And I'll go with about right there for now. So I'm going to zoom out using Control and my mouse wheel. So I'm going to change this to large branch and hit enter. And then I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to move this large branch copy down towards the bottom. And this is just going to stay snapped to this guide, hopefully. And now I'm just going to zoom in here with my mouse wheel a little bit, and I'm going to grab my scale tool and click on this object because I want this one to be a little bit smaller. That's just going to make our composition look a little bit more dynamic. So now I'm going to click and drag this. Make sure you have this icon locked here. That's going to keep the aspect ratio. So just drag it down a little bit, and I'll click scale. Then I'm going to grab my flip tool and click on this object to flip it. So just click on it once. And then I'll grab my move tool, and I'm just going to move this until, again, it snaps to that center guide. So hold Control and zoom out. So now we have these two objects, one at the top, one at the bottom. One is a little bit larger, and the other one is smaller. So I'll double click on this and name this small branch and hit enter. Just show and hide that to make sure it's the right layer there. So now what I'll do is I'll import that gold foil texture that we downloaded from Pixabay. And I just like the color gold better than the color that it comes with, which is this bluish color. If you guys like this bluish color, you can just sort of skip ahead. But I'm going to start with the large branch here. And what I'll do is I'll come over to the downloads folder where I downloaded this. And I'm just going to click and drag this into our composition and drop it. So now we have our gold foil right here. So I'm just going to rename this gold foil and hit enter. And now with my move tool, I'm just going to move this a little bit up so that it covers the large branch that we created. And I'm going to basically make it so it's about center. And now what I'll do is I'll hold Alt and click on that large branch layer. And then I'll hit Control I to invert the selection. And so that's going to select everything outside of our large branch shape. And with the gold foil layer selected, I'll hit the delete key. But I forgot one step actually, so you'll see that when we deleted that, it showed up as our background color. So let me hit Control Z. I need to right click and go to add alpha channel. That's going to add transparency to this. So now that I've done that, I'll hit the delete key, and then I'll just delete everything. I'll hit Control Shift A. The only issue is that everything that was outside of our composition here did not actually get deleted. So I'll just grab my eraser tool real quick, and I'm just going to manually erase this stuff in here. That's just going to make things easier later on in the tutorial. And then I'll go to Layer, Crop to Content, and that'll crop everything down to just the size of our object. So I'm going to repeat this step for the smaller branch. So let me just grab my move tool again and come back over to our downloads, and I'm just going to click and drag this and drop it. And I'm going to rename this Gold Foil 2. And I'll bring it up to the top there. So now again, I'm just going to move this down and make it so it's about centered with that small branch object. And then I'm going to Alt click on the small branch layer, and I'm going to hit Control I to invert that selection. And with my gold foil 2 layer selected here, I'll hit my delete key. Once again, I forgot to add that alpha channel, so right click, add alpha channel. So now I will hit the delete key, Control Shift A to select none. And I'm just going to grab my eraser tool and manually erase the stuff out here. And then I'm going to go to Layer, Crop to Content, and if it doesn't crop all the way to the content, it means you just probably missed a speck when you were erasing here. So let me try that again, Layer, Crop to Content, and now that is cropped to our small object. All right, one last thing I'm going to do with this gold here, I'm going to just adjust the color so it's a little bit lighter. I think it's a little bit too dark right now, so I'll go to Colors, Hue Saturation, and I'm going to shift the hue a little bit so it's a little lighter, and adjust the lightness as well, and the saturation. So now you'll see we get more of a pure gold color here, or just a lighter color gold. And I'll click OK. And then I'm going to come over to the gold foil 2 layer and just go to Filters, Repeat Hue Saturation, and that'll repeat that effect. Next, we want to add our text right here, the top level text. And so I'm just going to grab my text tool and click on my composition. And with my caps lock key on, I'm going to type "You are cordially invited to the marriage of," and I'm just going to select all the text in here, change the color of our text to black. So I just drag this to the bottom left corner and I'll click OK. And I don't like this font for this text, so I'm just going to come over here and highlight this, And I'm just going to change this, turn my caps lock key off real quick. So I'm going to change this to Perpetua or Perpetua. I just did Perpetua titling MT Light, or Perpetua. It's probably Perpetua. And I'm just going to change the font size to 35. And then right here we have the line heights. So that's the spacing between the two lines here. And I'm just going to change that to 29 so that the two lines of text are a little bit more spaced out. And then I'll hold the Alt key and then I'll activate the Move tool within the text tool. And then I can just move this until it's centered on this guide and then release. And then I'll just click to create a new line of text. And for this one, we're either going to type the name of the bride or the groom, whichever one you want to have at the top. So I just used the fictitious name and I had the caps lock key on, and I'll just go with Jane Quincy. And I have my settings over here set to quicksand, bold, 50, and white. That's why this keeps showing up as white over here. So I'm just going to change this to black. And I'll have to do this one more time for our next set of text. And now I'm just going to change the size of this to 100. And I'm actually going to delete the bold because I just want this to be a regular font. And by the way, this quicksand font is one of the free fonts you have to download and install before it'll work. And I believe the other font, the Perpetua font, is built directly into GIMP. All right, so now we have our correct font and our correct font size here. So I'm just going to hold Alt to activate the Move tool and just move this into place. It'll snap to that center guide there, and I'll release. And then now for this one, I'm just going to type 100 and delete the bold, and that way we don't have to do this every time. Now that we have the settings we want, I'm just going to click on here, and it actually changes back to white, so let me change this foreground color here to black. And then I just typed Robert Smith, which is my fictitious groom name, and I'll hold Alt and just move this into place like that. All right, so now I want to add the ampersand symbol in the middle here, so I'm just going to click to create a new text box, and I'll just type the ampersand symbol. But I'm going to change this font to Windsong, which is the other free font that you can download. So I'll just type Windsong there, and this time I'm going to change this to 150 for the font size. And then I'm going to hold the Alt key and just move. Actually, let me Control Z, hold the Alt key, move this into place. And let me just hold the Alt key one more time and move this down a bit. So now we have this pretty centered up here, and we can always come back with the Move tool and move everything around later. All right, so next I want to create the text for the date. So I'm just going to come over here, change this back to 50, and this time we actually do want this to be bold, so I'll just type bold there. And I'm going to click on here to create a new text box, and with my caps lock key on, I'll type July, and then I'll click away from that and type 20, which was my fictitious day, and then click and create a new text box and type 2019. So for this text, I actually increased it a little bit, so I'll increase the size of this to 100 and hit enter. And I'm just going to use the Move tool to move these three text boxes. It's just going to be quicker. I'm going to hold Control and zoom in with my mouse wheel. And now I'm going to move this a little bit. And this text box is not completely centered. You'll see there's a little bit of extra space on the right side of the 0. So I'm just going to manually eyeball this and also use the arrows on my keyboard to align this to the center of our composition. And you can ignore this guide right here because we're not actually aligning this to the center of our image. And I'm just going to come over here and grab my July text and move this up. This you can reference this guide right here just so that the July text and the 2019 text are even with one another. So I'm going to move this up. You'll see what I mean in a second. So right there you'll see now the 2019, the top of that text and the top of the July text are both aligned with this guide here, or they should be anyway. But these two items are a little bit off. They're not exactly equidistant from the center of our image here. So what I'm going to do is grab my alignment tool and I'm going to click on our July text. I'm going to change the offset here of the X to -125. And then I'm going to hit the distribute option here, the distribute horizontal centers of targets. So I'll click that and that'll align this so that it's 125 pixels from the exact center of our image. And then I'm just going to repeat this with the 2019 text, except I'm going to erase the negative symbol because I do want this to be positive, and I'll hit that distribute button again. So now these are both equidistant from the exact center of our image. So hold Control and zoom out. So we're just going to leave that as is for now and move on to the next part of the text. So I'll grab my text tool and we're going to go back to the Perpetua text. So I'll type, and let me just get rid of that caps lock there. So I'll type Perpetua, and actually let me make sure this is the titling one. And now I'm just going to type out the time, location, and city of this wedding, this fictitious wedding. And make sure, by the way, your justify is set to center. That's just going to make sure that the text is centered within the text box. So I'll click on here and I'll type at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and I'll hit enter. at the Brown Palace Hotel, enter Denver, Colorado. And now I'm just going to highlight this text and I'm going to decrease the size of it to 40 and increase the line spacing to 29 and hit enter. And now I'll hold Alt to activate that move tool and just move this to the center. And we can also move it up a little bit there, and I'll just release it right there. And actually I can hold Alt and just move this down a little bit. We can create a little bit more space there. And now I'm going to create my last line of text, so I'm going to click on here and I'll just type reception to follow. And for this text I'm going to highlight it and I'm going to change this back to Windsong. And I'm going to increase the font size to 100 and hit enter. And then I'll hold Alt and just center this up. So we'll go with about right there. And then I'll hold Control and zoom out with my mouse wheel. Now I'm just going to sort of realign everything with the move tool. So I'm just going to tweak my text here. And I'm just going to hover. Let me get a little bit closer here, make sure I'm on my text and move this down a bit. Maybe a little bit more there. And maybe move this up a bit. Maybe move this object up a bit as well. And we can actually erase the original objects, so the small and large branch layers, we can just go ahead and erase those. We don't need those anymore. And I can move this down a little bit as well. All right, so next I'm going to add a little bit of detail to this by adding some lines that I'll create using the Paths tool. And this will be the Ken Brewer Paths tool, which is named after Ken Brewer, our Diamond Patreon supporter. So I'm going to start with a path by the ampersand symbol here, so I'll hold Control and zoom in a bit. And I'm going to create a new layer, and I'll name this Black Path, which I actually already have this set to Black Path. And I'll make sure this is filled with transparency, and I'll click OK. And let me just click and drag this up towards the top of our composition there. And now what I'll do is I'll click and drag a guide down here from the top. And let me just center up our image a little bit better. So I'll come over here to our Ken Brewer Paths tool, and I'm just going to click on this guide here to create a point, and then I'll click over here to create another one. And so that should snap these points here, or these nodes, to our straight line. And now I want to fill this in. I'm just going to fill this in with black, so I'll make sure my foreground color is set to black, and I'll click Stroke Path, and I'll make sure it's set to solid color. I'll set the line width to 2 pixels right here and click Stroke. So now we have a nice line right there. Then I can hold my Alt key, and that'll allow me to move this path over, so I'll just move it over a little bit to the right. And these don't have to be perfectly centered. And I'll just hit Stroke Path again, and I'm going to keep all the settings the same, so I'll hit Stroke one more time. And if I grab a different tool and get rid of this guide, you'll see now we can see our paths that we created. These might be a little bit off center, so what I can do is click on my Black Path layer, go to Layer, Crop to Content, that'll crop everything down, and then I can zoom in a little bit here, grab my alignment tool, click on this layer, and then just click to center align this based on the image, or I'll just click Align Center of Target, and that'll center align that path. So I'll hold Control and zoom out a little bit, and I'll do this one more time, but I'm going to create the path over the July and the 2019 text. So I'll create my new layer here, and I'm just going to name this one Gold Path, and then I'll click OK. And now I'll hold Control and zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to grab my Move tool and just move this guide up a tiny bit here, and then I'm going to click and drag another guide down from the top, and I'm going to place this equidistant from the top and bottom of the July text. So basically I want equal space right here and right here. And so now I'll grab my Paths tool, and I'm just going to click again to create a node or a point right there, and then I'll click again right here. And now I'm going to change my color, so I pre-selected a nice gold color that I liked here. You can also just come over here to your gold up here if you want to use this same gold, and just use your eyedropper tool and sort of move it around until you get a gold color you like, and click OK. So then I'll come back down here to our path, and I'll hit Stroke Path, and I'm just going to increase the line width a little bit, so I'll increase that to 3 and click Stroke. So now we have our path there, and I'm going to hold Alt again so I can click and drag this path down a little bit. You want to try when you're doing that to not move it left or right at all, that way these two paths are aligned. And then I'll just hit Stroke Path again, and I'll hit Stroke with the same settings. And so now we have 2 stroked lines right here, and I'm just going to move over to the Move tool now, and I'm going to click on my Gold Path layer and go to Layer, Crop to Content. That'll crop everything down to just the size of these strokes here. And then I will duplicate this layer, and I'm going to use my Move tool, and I'll just move these guides out of the way right now, and I actually don't need this one either. And so now I'm going to click and drag this over, and if I hold Control while I do that, it'll keep it in straight line mode. And I'm just eyeballing this to make sure that it is equidistant from the numbers here on both sides. And then I'll right click on this layer and go to merge down, and that'll put both of these paths on the same layer. And if you really want to get nitpicky with it, you can grab your alignment tool, click on the stroke here, and then just click to align this relative to the center of the image. And then you can hold Control and zoom out. And we're just going to put the final touches on this, and that includes putting a border around the outside. So what I'll do is I'll come down here to the background layer, create a new layer, and I'm just going to name this background border, and I'll click OK or hit the Enter key. And now I'm just going to grab my rectangle select tool, and I'm going to loosely draw a rectangle here that is about the size of our composition. And then I can click and drag this to snap it to the center. And I can also re-add our horizontal center guide here by going to Image, Guides, New Guide by Percent. And I'll just set this to horizontal and click OK. Now we have that guide. That just allows us to easily center this up. Once I've done that, I'll hit Control-I to invert our selection area. And now I'm just going to randomly choose a grayish color here. And I went with a pretty light gray, so I'll just go with that right there, and I'll click OK. And now I can grab my bucket fill tool, and I'll just fill in this selection area. And I'll hit Control-I to invert that back so that now the inside is selected. And I'm going to go to Select, Shrink, and I'm going to change this unit here to pixels, and I'll set this to 5 and click OK. So that'll just shrink our selection area by 5 pixels. I'll fill that area in, and then I'm going to go to Select, Shrink one last time. This time I'm going to shrink this by 15 pixels and click OK. And I'll just hit my delete key this time. Then I'll go to Control-Shift-A to select none. And now we have this pretty cool, elegant border going around our invitation. And by the way, if you want to double check your colors before you print, you can always go to View, Color Management, and click Proof Colors. And if you have your CMYK soft proofing setup, which I show you how to do in another tutorial, and I'll link that in the description, you should see your colors resembling what they're going to look like when you print this. Because remember, GIMP is an RGB color space, and most printers use a CMYK color space. So the colors will look slightly different on your computer monitor versus how they're going to look on a card. But anyway, once you're ready to save this, you can go to File, Export As, and I'm just going to name this Wedding Invitation. And now I'm going to locate the file where I want to save this. And then I can change the file type here. I recommend probably doing something like a high quality JPEG, or even a PDF or a portable document format. And I'll just hit export, and I'll hit export again, and I'll just go to View, Show Guides to hide these guides, and there you go. So that's it for this tutorial. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/daviesmediadesign. You can also visit our website at daviesmediadesign.com. You can enroll in our best-selling GIMP photo editing course from beginner to pro photo retoucher on Udemy, and you can support our channel and help us grow by becoming a patron on Patreon. And I'll include a link to that as well as all the relevant links from this tutorial in the description of the video. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.